Hello, my name is Pablo Requena and welcome to this series of videos about how to French polish your classical guitar. So in the last video I ended up saying that by now I will be able to tell you exactly how many sessions of polishing I've done to get to this point. So I have done 5 days of polishing and I've done 3 sessions every day. So all in all, there are 15 sessions of French polishing. And what I did in each one of them was to go all over the instrument like I was showing in the previous video. So now we are to the point in which, before we go any further, what I've done is to allow the instrument to dry for 24 hours before I do any more work. And what you will see here is that if you look from the distance, the instrument looks lovely and it looks very shiny. We've got polish everywhere and it looks fantastic. But if you were able to look very close up, which in the camera is not going to show you, but now there are little blemishes and we want to get rid of them before we carry on in the process, because I have to do more polishing and I will be applying more shellac into the guitar, but I want to now start thinking about getting to the final point and getting the instrument looking better and better all the time. And these little blemishes come from maybe accumulation of pumice powder or maybe a little bit of dust that settled, and you get a few little dings and things, or it might be even fibers from the cloth that get deposited and stuck to the polish. So we want to get everything completely out of the way. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use a small block. This is what I recommend, because if you use a block that is too big, you'll be working into an area that is too much to work with, and then you could end up removing all the polish in places where you don't want to. So for me it works very well to work with a block like this. This one is 50 millimeters by 35. You don't need to make one exactly like this one, but this size I find that is very useful. And I also have, this is a block of MDF, but I have a little bit of cork, a layer of cork stuck to it, because it's hard enough but it's sort of soft enough so that it's not going to scratch the French polish. So also I'm going to use 120 sandpaper, and even though this is wet and dry paper, you can use wet or dry, with water or with oil you could use it. I'm going to use it dry, that's my preference, but this is up to you, whichever way you prefer to do it. The reason why I like it dry is because it's a little bit more controllable and you can see better where you're going with things. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with my hand, I'm going to wipe off as much of the oil that is sort of sitting in the surface, because as the shellac is drying, what's happening is that the oil that we used as a lubricant to be able to apply the polish, it's gradually coming out to the surface as the shellac dries, and some of that oil will end up evaporating and drying, but it does take a rather long time. So there's still some oil in the surface, and also when you touch it you can sort of see the mark that your finger's leaving behind. So there's still a little bit of oil here. So what I'm going to do is that I don't really want to be working with the block everywhere. What I want to do is to look at the reflection of the light into the guitar and look for those little flaws that I was talking about. So up here I have one. Again, I would try to show in the camera, but it's not going to show very well, but you will see them and they're very obvious. So what I'm going to do is to make sure that I remove that big one first. So I'm just going to come into it with my block. And now, again, I don't know if it will show you, what is happening is that the high spot is becoming matte and there's a little bit of shine around that spot. So we need to see that that shine sort of goes completely and that will be the point in which that spot is completely flat and gone. And also because there's still a bit of oil here, it's sort of clogging up the paper, so I can use a clean cloth to wipe this into it so that I can clean it, and then I can come back to it again and just do a little bit more. Not quite there yet, so I'm going to do a little bit more here. I always want to move the block. I don't want to be just working in the same sort of area, because I could dig a trench into there and scratch something. Right, so that's completely gone. This area is completely matte, so I'm happy with what's been done in there. So now I'm going to bring it back to the light, and I'm going to look for another area where there might be in here. There's a couple of them in there. So this one I can also feel it here with my finger. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing here. A little bit more. That's it. That's gone. Back to the light. And yeah, I think it's pretty good. Then now very small things in the surface, but I don't need to work on them with the block in this way. So now that I've done that, you want to do this all over the guitar, okay? So I've just done the soundboard, which is probably in a way the most awkward area of the guitar to get up to the best standard. The back is always the easiest thing to do, and if I look in here, I'm sure I've got something, but I'm not going to do this right now. It's the same thing. So you want to do that all over the instrument and try to remove all those blemishes out of the way. Once that's done, what we're going to do is that I'm going to move on into a different type of paper, and this time I'm not going to use a block because the surface is very flat and the block was useful to remove high spots, but now that they're gone, I can work with, this is a different type of paper. It's 1500, and it's like a cloth. Guitarists use this to work their nails with and make them really smooth, but you can also use it like this. And now I'm just gonna try to get this sandpaper all over the surface, just to remove the very surface or the very top layer, and it's making the whole of this surface a little matte. Again, I can clean this out into here, and it's very noticeable the difference between the shine that I had before I started sanding and the sort of semi-gloss or satin look that I'm getting now by doing this here. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes doing this all over the surface. Okay, so here there's one that I missed before. So I'm going to go back with the block, and I'm going to work it out of the way. Like that. And now I can go back. If I wanted to level up surfaces, I wouldn't work with sandpaper straight on my hand, because the fingers or my skin is too soft, and all it will do is to ride over any blemishes, but because it's very flat and we just use the block to remove them, then I can be a little bit more comfortable removing just the top surface, which is where there might be a tiny bit of dust accumulated there. And it's good to remove the oil and the polish that gets accumulated in the sandpaper. Now when you're doing this job, you want to pay special attention to the edges, because this is very gentle, this sandpaper, but nevertheless the edges, there always are areas where the polish is a little bit thinner. So you want to, you could even avoid the edge, the binding itself, and it will be fine, unless you have something that you need to deal with. But that way you know that you're not going to remove the polish that it's in that area. Right, so now what I'm going to do to finish off is to go back to my block and put this cloth, sanding cloth into it, and then I'm just going to get to these edges here, because I want them to be very flat and definitely clean as well. And if you have the bridge on, you can see it's not here, so it's a lot easier to polish the guitar without it. But if you did, all you need to do, you can go across the grain a little bit like that, right next to the edge, all the way around. This light is sort of covering, giving me a shadow, so like that. Get really close to it, but then finish off with the grain. Again, this is too fine to be noticeable really, but it's always a good practice to finish with the grain, anything that you do on, especially on the soundboard. But you also would do these two ends, and here's where you have to be really very careful, because if you dig in too much and work on here too much, you'll end up making a little dip, which it will not show now, but later on when the guitar is completely glossed up, it will show up like a sore thumb. So you have to be really careful. So the way that I will approach this is gradually like that, without really sitting in there and going for it. So you have to be very careful with that. But you know, I don't have the bridge on in place yet, so obviously it's a lot easier for me to be able to do all of this. Right, so now we have the soundboard is ready to move forward, and what you would need to do before moving on to what I'm going to do in a minute is to do the same thing that I've done in the soundboard, but everywhere. And of course, don't forget your bridge, which I have already done a little bit here, and you can see this is gone quite a bit matte, and most of the shine is gone, but I will be doing the same everywhere. And then this is now starting to get ready to build up a bit the polish a bit more. You can see this looks a bit messy in this area. That's always a difficult area. So these are the things that we want to be removing with the sandpaper. Right, so once you've done this process all over the instrument, the next thing to do is to move on and carry on with the polishing. So what I would do is I'm just going to do a little bit of work in the soundboard, and then we'll leave it at that until we're ready for the next stage, for the next step. And what you will need to do is now carry on building up the layers. And if you need to go back and do a bit of sanding, then don't let it be, because when you're polishing, also when you're making, it's very easy to kind of ignore things that are not quite 100%, and then by the time you want to tackle them, it's a lot harder. So as soon as you notice something that is not quite right, then don't be scared to go back to the sandpaper. Now, all the scratches that we left here from the sandpaper, even though they're very fine, they're there, and they're going to go as we polish further. So what I'm going to do is to clean my rubber a little bit. Maybe I can put a bit of alcohol to clean it up with. So I'm going to re-establish this point in here. I have now switched to my old rubber, you might have noticed, because I'm polishing much more comfortably with it. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to apply a little bit less polish than before. So each time I'm going to be applying less. So that is all I'm going to apply for the soundboard until I work through it and it's all sort of dry. And then I'm also going to put 1 drop of alcohol, no more than that. I might put more if I need it, but I want to take it slowly with the oil and try to use as little as possible. And then we do like before, we get the oil and spread it everywhere, and without applying too much pressure. You also want to spread the content of the rubber over the whole soundboard. And again, here you can do big circles, so you could do figure of eights, trying to accommodate the shapes of the guitar. And I'm trying to avoid the edges a little bit for now, because I don't want to have any runs going down. There's not a lot of polish here, so I don't think it would run too easily unless I really press hard. But nevertheless, it's something to bear in mind. And now what I'm going to do, because I can feel that the rubber will allow me to do that, is that I'm increasing the pressure a little bit. Now I'm just going to do 1 run over the whole edge. Now I don't have a problem going over the edges, because I know that the rubber is not too wet. And I'm trying to be as methodical as possible to make sure that I have been the same amount of times everywhere in the soundboard, rather than overdoing one area and then not doing so much in a different area. So basically what I'm going to do is that I'm going to carry on doing this, because even though the guitar now is starting to look really good, I know that the polish is not really as deep as it could be. And there's a couple of areas where I look at to kind of decide when I'm okay to with the thickness of the polish and okay to stop. So one of them is around the tape, and again, even if it doesn't show in the video very well, I can see that there's still a very, very small area right next to the tape where the polish hasn't got to that point yet. So as I'm working, all of that will disappear. And in a way, it looks like this, the polish sort of dries over the tape and it covers the whole surface. So then I know that I've got enough polish in my soundboard. Also, if I look at the rosette and if I have any areas where the grain might be a little open, then I know I'm still not ready. But this is pretty much as good as it can be. And also the same in these areas here. So again, I don't know if you'll be able to see very well, but basically this line where the rosewood meets the cedar, it's got a good amount of polish, but I can see still a very, very small line of wood that is still a little empty. So by the time I get all of that completely full, then I know that I'm done. But you can see it's already looking really good. I mean, many people would leave that like that and it would be fine. But I like trying to keep the level of the polishing and the standard of the polishing as high as possible. Then the other thing that you would need to be doing is filling the grain in the neck. Because at the moment with the neck, all we've done is to polish it like the rest of the guitar, but we have ignored the fact that we never did any grain filling in the neck. So I'm just going to do a little bit so that you can see actually how it's done. And basically what we're going to do, for that I'm going to use a different rubber. So forgive me for a second. So here we are. I'm just going back to the rubber that I started with, which is a bit newer, but I like the way that rubber feels, so I don't want to mess up. I don't want to mess with it. So what we're going to do here is that we are going to apply a little bit of pumice powder. Now I know that I've got a little bit of oil, and I also have a good amount of shellac. So the powder is going to come through this cloth, and again, I don't need to go mad with it, but you know, it's very difficult to see because the dust is really very fine, but it's there nevertheless. And now I'm going to get a little bit of alcohol, just plain alcohol, nothing else. And I don't want to put a huge amount because I don't want this to run everywhere, but I just want to put enough so that I can, let me see if I can bring the light into here. So what I want to do is to work the polish that is here already, and the pumice powder is going to help me to cut it so that when I cut that polish, it's gonna get the polish and the alcohol, and you know, this little mix that we've got here is gonna cut the polish and place it where there's a hole, which is the grain. And what it will do is that gradually it will close it up. So the pumice powder is not the grain filler. It's just a grinding agent to help you cut the polish so that you can place it somewhere else. So now I need to put a little bit more alcohol. You will know when the guitar is asking you for more alcohol because you will feel it that it starts to get, it just doesn't want to move around and it gets a bit stuck. So then at that point is when you need to apply more pressure. But basically you're going to be working like this, and then kind of in long strokes to remove any high spots or anything, to level things up. And gradually this is going to start to look much more like the grain is gone. I can see that there's still a little bit, so I will be doing more, but you need to keep going until you can see that all the grain is gone. And you also need to do a little bit in the heel as well. And once that's done, then you can carry on polishing like everything else that we've done with the rest of the guitar. So what we're going to do is that we're going to leave this video here now. We're going to finish this session at this point, and what I will do is that in the next video we will see what it looks like, and what we are going to be aiming for the next video is to have the right amount of shellac into the guitar, so that then we can leave it to dry for a few days until the shellac that is here, it will harden, it will shrink, and it will dry up. But also all the oil that we used will be coming out into the surface, so that we can then start working about or basically working in removing that oil and then obtaining the real high gloss that we need to get from the instrument. So until this next time, and enjoy French polishing.